Ukraine, with our assistance, have been fighting back in Crimea. They've sunk and retreated, so damaged around 30% of the Black Sea Fleet, which is extraordinary given Ukraine doesn't have their own navy, and the Black Sea Fleet is the Russian one, and reopened grain exports, not far off the levels they were before the war. So it's a mixed picture, I think, is the answer. And now is not the time to throttle back or forget about Ukraine. They need our support. It's the right thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. It's also in our interest to do. We can't have a dictator march across Europe again.
Russia began its full-scale invasion of Ukraine 2 years ago today. The UK government pledged nearly £12 billion in support to Ukraine, including £7 billion for military assistance. The latest commitment today is for £250 million to help restock supplies of artillery shells. Here to reflect on the UK's role is Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Is this £250 million going to be enough to break the apparent deadlock and make some progress towards victory for Ukraine 2 years in?
It will certainly be of assistance, but as you mentioned, it's part of a very much wider package, over £7 billion in military aid, and then a lot more in economic and other assistance. But perhaps actually the bigger thing still, even than the money that the UK's put towards our friends in Ukraine and their important battle on behalf of us all, is actually the sort of moral leadership we provided that President Zelensky has previously said to me, without the United Kingdom, this war would have been lost. And what he went on to explain he meant by that was we've been first to everything. We provided lethal aid before the war started. We have trained now over 60,000 Ukrainian troops here in the UK and provided all manner of different packages, of which this munitions package is just the latest. And that has brought other countries along to do the same. So our leadership role has probably been the biggest key assistance to Ukraine since the beginning of this.
You must feel the frustration, perhaps from President Zelensky, perhaps even yourself, that we are 2 years into this thing and actually Russia is making advances. Advidka, the most recent, I suppose, example of that. And actually, many people will be sitting here 2 years in thinking, well, why on earth can't we actually stop Putin? We've been talking about it for 2 years and we've failed.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on it. And as you rightly say, I mean, it should be said that 2 years ago to the day when I called my then Ukrainian number and said to him, Minister Kuber, of what's going on, he said, I'm standing in a field outside Kyiv. I think it's about to be invaded. And here we are 2 years later. That hasn't happened. And Ukraine has pushed Russia back from half of the territory they initially took after the main invasion. So that's obviously extraordinary and extraordinarily good. You're right about some of the Russian aggression. They've retaken Dvivka. On the other hand, Ukraine, with our assistance, have been fighting back in Crimea. They've sunk and retreated, so damaged around 30% of the Black Sea Fleet, which is extraordinary given Ukraine doesn't have their own navy, and the Black Sea Fleet is the Russian one, and reopened grain exports, not far off the levels they were before the war. So it's a mixed picture, I think, is the answer. And now is not the time to throttle back or forget about Ukraine. They need our support. It's the right thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. It's also in our interest to do. We can't have a dictator march across Europe again.
Indeed. Some of the other stories around today, Mr. Shapps, the front page of The Times, pro-Palestinian activists tried to force the Commons into lockdown and called for more pressure on MPs. This is Ben Jamal, the director of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, who we actually heard from on this programme just before you, a few minutes ago. Do you feel intimidated by the actions of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and how they conducted themselves on Wednesday?
I think it's uncomfortable. I thought that, I mean, I don't know the truth of how close they were or their intentions. I didn't hear that interview of sort of storming Parliament. But I do think that, what was projected onto the side of Parliament, which is actually a really racist thing to be saying, is inappropriate on the mother of all parliaments. The way to, and people have a perfectly legitimate right to express their views and campaign in this country. But the way to do that is through peaceful means by not intimidating other sections of society, and that crossed the line. And as I don't know the reality of whether there was really a plan to storm Parliament.
Yeah,
At
it
least that
wasn't
didn't
it wasn't
succeed.
storming Parliament. It was about lobbying MPs. It was about
Oh, I
showing up
see.
to kind of sit down and lobby MPs. But there were 3,000 people, and so
Yeah.
he was kind of complaining that perhaps people weren't being let in the way that they should have been in order to lobby
But
MPs.
I don't think Parliament can have 3,000 people at one time. It's a pretty that would be pretty much overwhelm central lobby, I would have thought. But it's important people can have their say, and that's entirely legitimate. Where it gets illegitimate is where people go too far and start intimidating people, and it doesn't matter whether it's members of one community or another, or indeed elected representatives. There's no room for that in a civilized society, and we need to show that we can have those differences but still manage to live together, and that's the sort of country that Britain should be.
Okay. I want to ask you about Lee Anderson next, your Conservative colleague, the MP for Ashfield, who's claimed that Islamists have, quote, got control of London and its mayor Sadiq Khan. Here's the quote. He said, about Sadiq Khan, he's given our capital city away to his mates. I don't actually believe that the Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is they've got control of Khan and they've got control of London. You've just called out Ben Jamal and indeed the slogan that was projected onto Parliament as being racist. Will you call out Lee Anderson for his racist comment?
So, forgive me, because I don't want to talk about Ukraine. I haven't fully caught up on those comments,
I've
but I
caught
would
you up
say
there.
this.
Those are the comments.
Okay, fine. But I would say this. Look, I think Sadiq Khan is not a very good mayor for London. I think he's poor for this capital, and I have many criticisms. I wouldn't go after him in a personalised way like that. That's not, I think, helpful. But I do think that there is a lot of concern about, his policies in lots of different areas, from transport to housing, to the way that, as the sort of head of the police, in part at least, that he arranges or leads the police commission in London.
Mm.
And I think that is a problem. It's probably spilling out there into some of what Lee Anderson said, but no, not language that I would use.
Okay, so you're critical of that language. What should Lee Anderson do? Should he apologise? Should he have the whip removed for using this
Well,
language?
as I say, I've got the quotes from you. So I imagine the interview is probably a bit longer than that. So I'd rather I waited to see the whole thing, and also it would be a matter for the party and for whips. What I would say though is that with Sadiq Khan and the way that he's run London, I see a lot of the frustrations from
Sure, but
Londoners.
the frustration shouldn't lead to comments like that, which Annalise
Yeah,
Dodds, the Labour chair, says Lee Anderson's comments are unambiguously racist and Islamophobic. Would you use those words to describe his comments?
well, I already said I wouldn't use his words, but nor am I going to jump and use an opposition MP's words about Lee Anderson without
Well,
seeing in
why
a lot
not if
more
they're
detail.
factually correct?
Because you're presenting something to me, as I said, I came on to speak about Ukraine that I haven't really seen in detail. And long experience has taught me never to shoot from the hips on these things, and actually to get all of the facts. And I imagine what's going on there with some frustration about the way that the mayor, and I've experienced it particularly in transport, and I know the way he goes about his housing policies, they don't work for London and for Londoners. And I think that there's probably frustration about the way the policing is operating as well.
Mm.
And we've seen this during these protests. Perhaps that overspill, perhaps Lee Anderson didn't address that in the best possible way, but I'd certainly want to see the facts first.
Understood. And I know you have to go, so just very quickly, there's also reporting in the Times this morning about who could replace Rishi Sunak at the top of the Conservative Party. Are your Schnapps with Shapps event part of a future leadership ambition for you, Mr. Shapps?
Not only have I never had a schnapps with Shapps, I've never actually drunk schnapps
Have you
either. So
not?
I
What a
don't.
revelation.
Look, I'm completely focused on the main job, winning
Sure.
the next election. I don't believe all this stuff in the polls, because we saw in elections in 2015, referendum in 16, election in 17, they often go a different way to the way that people imagine. My entire focus is on defending this country through difficult times, supporting Ukraine, as we've just been discussing. And for the future, well, we'll just have to wait and see what the future holds.
Grant Shapps, Defence Secretary, thank you very much indeed. Good to speak to you.
Thank you.